But we've got one more panel member here, Paul Joyce. I'll let Paul give a little intro about himself. He comes from a slightly different background, bit of finance experience, a bit more UK focused, but now is in the depths of his own first startup. After Paul's introduced himself, I'll hit you with the first question that I have for the panel.
Okay.
So give us a little
so
intro.
my background, I worked in an investment bank. So I'm one of these people who did work in an investment bank, and I knew at the time that was never going to be what I wanted to do, but I kind of always had things on the side, and I always tried different kind of startup ideas. And the most recent one, which kind of started taking off about September of last year, is my current startup called Gecko Board, which allows businesses to pull in key metrics from a whole bunch of different sources, put it up on a big plasma screen, and lets their whole kind of office see what's going on. So we've got customers like NASA and Groupon, Fox News, and BarackObama.com. They're all kind of using it to keep everyone in their company informed about what's happening at that point in time. But yeah, my background is slightly different. Maybe I don't know what your first question is.
So my first question is, this is sort of a perfect one, is when did you realize? I think Rob started off with a question that, look, he didn't figure it out until he was 27, 28, and took him some time to think. What made you make the switch?
Okay, so the reason I was attracted to investment banking was one reason, and that was money. I was attracted by the cash you could earn, and it's great. But I was very aware at that time that I knew I didn't want to do this for the rest of my life. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew it wasn't this. Working in an investment bank can be a kind of fairly soul-destroying experience, you feel like, a very small part in a very big machine, and you can't really affect change in any meaningful way. That's how I felt. So I knew I didn't want to do that for long term, but I thought, let's make hay while the sun shines, put some money aside. I didn't kind of get into the kind of investment banking lifestyle. I didn't over leverage myself. I didn't buy a big house, expensive cars, lots of holidays, whatever else. So a lot of people do that. They get sucked into this trap. It's a very subtle trap where suddenly you're earning, many, more money than you could have imagined. But actually, your lifestyle, you're spending that money. Your lifestyle is going up and up and up. And so, to remove yourself from that situation, whether it's to go into a different vertical or to try your own thing, becomes a huge lift. It's a forklift effort because you have to scale down, you have to somehow meet your mortgage payments, you have to, completely throttle back your lifestyle. So I think the first thing is, even if you do go into investment bank and you sense that this is not something that you want to do forever, try not to get kind of caught up in this whirlwind. And so I was there, and actually my day job was designing and modeling, building data warehouses for BI and MI. And I knew that it wasn't something I wanted to do, and I always kind of kept things going on the side. So trying little startups, an affiliate site here, or a product comparison site, or a whole bunch of different things. And then when the idea for Gecko Board hit, I pretty much knew straight away that this was going to be the one. It felt so right to me, but I kept working on it whilst I was working in the bank, and it only started gaining some traction about 4 months after we started working it, and about a month after that I handed in my notice, and a month after that I quit and started working on it full time. So I was able to kind of have these parallel streams, bringing in the money and being able to bootstrap and being able to kind of spend money on things like designers and other developers and things like that. So being able to do kind of two things at once and then make that transition kind of quite easily. But it's when did it drop that I wanted to do a startup? I'm not really sure. It kind of gradually built up from little projects I was doing to something that really caught my interest and said, this is what I want to do.
No, I particularly like that because you still got the security blanket, you know what you're doing, then it starts taking off, getting traction, and it all kind of suddenly makes sense.
Yeah, although it's not without its risk either. I mean, it could fall on its face tomorrow. My wife is a pensions actuary, so she's incredibly risk averse. So actually convincing her that now's the time to make the jump was, it's harder than speaking to any investor. That was a sales job, but actually managed to convince her of the upside, and it's working well.
Okay, Angad, any thoughts on that kind of point where you sort of took a really big risk on a different project, and what sort of put you over the edge there?
I think that what was really important from the presentation was this whole thing about passion. I mean, I think I've been driven a lot by seeing just how passionate I am about something and then reasoning it through. And because, unlike a lot of people, I've been involved in very many different kinds of business and project, etc. I think it's really about throwing yourself behind it and realizing that the risk is part of the buzz, and that actually you have to work at it. You know, I think it's a myth, no matter what people say, that an idea makes a business. You know, I think an idea can be the seed of a business, but you need to really, really work at it, and it helps if you like what you're working at. You know, so it sounds a bit woolly in general, but I think in just about everything I've done, it's always been a big risk. And in a lot of ways, I wouldn't have it any other way, because you know it's kind of that feeling that, you know, like you know how it is when like the best rock stars say that they get nervous when they go on stage. You know, that's what it's like in business. Every time you do a project, you get that little bit of nervous buzz and nervous energy out of it. And you've got to just embrace that. I mean, I think the important thing is to embrace that nervous energy, but not let it consume you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
Rob, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I was nodding when Paul was speaking. You know, for me, it was working on a series of little projects and then just finally realizing that one of them was something that I might consider doing in the long term. There was no aha moment. There was no big idea. It was just something that would seem to be getting a bit of traction. A couple of people were interested. We raised a little bit of money, and so it just sort of felt like it was the right time to just give it a go. And I was studying, so I didn't have that instant need to be employed or to be working at the time, and that made it a lot easier too. So no, I think I totally agree with what both of you are saying.
One more thing to this.
Can you talk louder?
Yeah, sure. Sorry. Most people say I'm loud all the time, but I've got to say that instinct is one of the most underrated factors. And one thing, I mean, I'm a big fan of education. I love education. The one thing that can get curtailed by too much education is the notion of instinct. So don't lose that instinct. Listen to what's inside. It's quite powerful. You know?
That takes a lot of discipline, though, to actually start to listen to what you know, instinct.
Right.
I guess it's instinct, but for me, it's probably it feels like a series of learnings. Okay, so
That's right.
so you're building these things, you're building up these lessons in the background, and it's only when you're kind of faced with the decision: should I go this way or should I go that way? A lot of you would say that's instinct, but it's probably a lot of kind of memory from past experience. Yeah,
but it's
and
like a computer program,
Yeah.
right? Because you know, if you think about it, an answer comes out, right? There's a hell of a lot of input into any equation.
yeah.
Right, and it all comes there and it all gets processed, and ultimately there's something, and there's a kernel that gets spilled out, and that's the answer. That's happening in you all the time.
Yeah.
You just got to tap into it.
And you have to expose yourself
That's
to
right.
that. You have
That's
to
right.
expose yourself to those sort of decisions, and I think that's where you can begin to build up instinct. It is by exposing yourself. But the first few times you do it, you know, it can go any way. It can, you know, and you can still make mistakes. It doesn't matter how many times you go through a similar sort of process. You can still make mistakes, and I think that's
Mistakes are good,
Yeah.
right? Mistakes are good as long as you have the ability to navigate through that mistake. I mean, that's why I made the point about even in the business that I now run, you know, I mean, there's always mistakes, and there's always, you know, brick walls, and actually it seems like the end and everything's going to collapse, and then, you know, you work your way out of it. I tell you, this has been getting said a lot in the press recently, but there was something about the difference between the US and the UK, and it is an actual fact. In the US, people don't frown on failure. You know, people aren't afraid of failure, and people will recognize when you've given things a go. I think that's something in the culture here that it's just different, you know. But to tell you the truth, you're right, you know, but the whole thing about mistake, in a lot of ways, a mistake, as long as it's not fatal, is kind of like, you know, the revelations that you have, you know, if you're, you know, enveloped by a wave in the sea and you nearly drown but you don't, and your life flashes in front. But that's what it is. That's the wave, right?
It's a learning opportunity.
That's right.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's right. So yeah, as long as it's not fatal.
Yeah, because yesterday I had the good chance, on the good fortune of meeting and talking briefly with Reid Hoffman, and also one of his investment guys in his venture firm called Greylock. And interestingly, he sort of presented one side of the argument and then made a comparable about two different ways of starting this whole kind of process up. And Greylock invests solely in businesses that are going to be billion-dollar, world-changing companies, and now they don't even talk in tens of millions of users, they talk in hundreds of millions. And he was very adamant the way he kind of presented this. And he said, I was sitting back smiling, thinking like, that's very humble and small visioned. I quite like it, very reasonable, especially in the UK. And he said, look, we look for three things in this order when I make my investment decision. So it was kind of Greylock and me. I couldn't really quite understand the difference, but it was all the same. He said, I look for really intelligent people, number one, because I think intelligent people can basically get through any kind of problem, work their way through it, not a big deal. Secondly, I look for really ambitious people. I'm like, well, that makes sense with 100 million users and so forth. And thirdly, he said, yeah, then I believe in a good product on the end of that. So there, I think the vision, and they've done this a number of times, and they quite understand this, is great people build great companies. And I think you can take that one bit out of it. But then he said, which I thought was kind of interesting, and I've seen lots of conflicting information, or let's say different views of information in the market out there, which is a lot of VCs, your Sequoias and so forth, they want to build these great big life-changing, world-changing, galaxy-changing companies, which can be quite intimidating the moment you come out of school, and certainly was for me. Whereas there's another guy, Dave McClure, who's head of 500 startups, who basically is a big proponent of lean startups. He's like, look, take a seed round, make a company that's profitable really quickly, build it off the back of 3 or 4 guys, and never ever take financing ever again, if you can help it. Build something that inherently works small and scale it up, and you know what? At the end of a year or 2 or 3, you can sell for 20 million bucks. What are your kind of thoughts on those two kind of views? Because there's this building for kind of greatness with a Mark Zuckerberg vision, which happens, albeit rarely,
I'm lucky enough to count Dave as 500 startups as an investor in Geckoboard. But I don't think they're necessarily incompatible, up to a point, okay? So you can start lean, and you can be incredibly lean, and you can have your 2 guys working out of a spare room, making money go really far, and learning all the time, and applying the whole philosophy behind lean startups. And you can almost suck it in. You can see which direction it's heading in. You can build, a $25 million company, but what Mike Arrington referred to as dipshit companies, that's how it's viewed a lot in the valley. Or you can, if it's beginning to kind of show real signs of true traction and wide scale availability and scalability, then you can take it down. So I think starting lean is a great starting point, and I think going for the small round if you need it, and trying to be really efficient with your money. It's great for some sectors. I mean, consumer stuff is a different thing. I'm not qualified to speak, but certainly on the B2B side, it's a great approach.
First of all, I thought that the folklore said, especially in this space, that every company is absolutely massive when I was starting my 250 garage. I wish I had a garage. but I mean, there's a lot of folklore, and frankly, I don't buy into any of it. There's many ways, and there's many paths to both success and failure. I don't think there's any formula. I think that a lot has to do with being just outside your comfort zone, but not too far outside your comfort zone. And everyone finds their groove. There's a lot of people that I've encountered that have been brilliant at taking things to a point when they hit the ceiling, and then they have to bring someone in. I employ now So, it changes all the time. The types of people change. This constantly varying environment. And I think that, there is something, everyone wants to try and put a formula around how you can make tech investment work. I actually think tech investments are a lot more similar to what I do in film than it is to what I do in manufacturing. And in film, you have a script, business plan, you have to cast the characters around it, and hopefully a good director. And then sort of lick your fingers, stick it in the air and say, whoops, I hope this works. And that's kind of like tech investment. The only thing is that film is unnecessary, whereas I think that actually a lot of tech now is becoming more necessary. And that's why I've sort of turned some of my thinking in terms of what I've done in film now to looking at tech investment. For me, tech doesn't just mean, IT related. I'm also looking very much at the typical stuff, clean energy.
Could you speak up, please? We can't hear you.
Sorry, things like manufacturing technologies. So things taking manufacturing into a different realm. Some of the things I was talking about earlier. So personally, I think that there is no formula as horses for courses. Just that side.
Yeah, I agree with that a bit as well. I mean, I think if you were to look at all the investment or financing decisions that all entrepreneurs have made over the last 5 years, I think you would find that those decisions were much more driven by the market conditions than they were about the active choice to raise money or not raise money. I think, frankly, most entrepreneurs would tell you if market money is available, they're going to go out and raise it. So I also believe firmly in this lean startup mentality. It makes absolute sense to start off with and to spend a small amount and try and make it whatever. But some businesses don't work that way. Over 4 years at York, we spent $150 million now. We've raised 250, so we have some left. But we could not have done what we've done without raising the money that we've raised. So lean startup would not have worked for what we're trying to do as well.
You made that shit.
Yeah, exactly. Made that one day station. I think what is an interesting question, and it sort of relates to that somewhere, and to think about this comparison between the US and the UK is something seems to happen at about $100 or $200 million in Europe that doesn't happen in the US. So there are no publicly traded technology companies in Europe that are worth more than $1 billion. None. And in the US there are several. And so what is it that means, I mean, there are two that probably made it, Spotify and this, Skype, and they both took it in different directions, they've stayed private in some way. And so is there something happening in Europe that means that when people get to 100 or 200, they lose the appetite for leaping at that extra hurdle? I'm not sure what that might be. Yeah, autonomy and most of it, yeah, so they sold in the end. But is there something there that means that is stopping people from taking that extra step? It might be nothing, but I think that's, speaking from someone who spent a lot of time in the US over the last few years, if you speak to investors in the US, that's one thing that they puzzle about. VCs say, okay, if I'm an investor who looks to grow something from 100 million to $1 billion, where's my exit? What's my exit? Because you can't point out examples of how it works.
That's a wonderful problem to have, though, I think, for an entrepreneur. To be making that decision of what do I do? I look for the $1 billion purchaser. No, absolutely. One interesting sort of thing, right, on that note, and I didn't know you had Mangrove as an investment. We also went through Mangrove at the time, and it wasn't actually dissimilar. The only company that would give us €1 million for 3 slides in a PowerPoint and 3 employees that were contractually bound at the time. They were not. Everyone was working full time. It was great. But yeah, that's not the case right now. And having just sold one of my companies and going through the kind of financing thing right now, how would you suggest? It's still about being lean, but we still need to find a little bit of money to make something work. And there's one guy smiling in the front audience who actually made a few thousand with his team in a business plan competition over the summer, which was a great way to get over £10,000 and kick things off. But how would you kind of suggest, in today's world, how much do you really need? Is there a rule of thumb there? What would you kind of suggest? Getting something off the ground, how much effort do I need to put in? Is there an answer to that question?
I don't think there is, because this Well, there's as many answers to that question as there are businesses. I think there's so many different, innovative models, different scales at work. You can't really say that, if you spend this amount of money, this should be enough to get you off the ground. I think it's difficult. To answer your point about how do you get money, I'm all for self-sufficiency where you can, because if you can last for as long as you can on as little money as you can, whilst not jeopardising your business, then you're in a position of strength when you go to the market to look for money. And so I'm a great believer in self-sufficiency, but sometimes you do need a capital injection. Sometimes, in order to take the business to the next level or to accelerate the growth of the business, you do need money. The question, I guess, these days is do you go for these kind of small angel rounds and whatever else? Or do you try to really push it out and go for a large Series A?
Yeah, I think one interesting point there is, and I've sort of seen it a bit less here, but I see it a lot in America. I saw one example of a guy who had a company, had people working for 2 years, no one was getting paid, people had equity and options and agreements in place, but everyone was working part-time outside of their real jobs to a point where they actually got comfortable with the product, they got some kind of user traction, they had a bunch of data, and then they were actually able to go to investors and command a pretty decent initial valuation. So there are kind of ways to do that. I've seen that a lot less over in Europe. People tend to use the excuse, oh, I'm working full time, I can't do this, or equity doesn't mean anything because the company's not any big. Well, it's not going to get anywhere if you don't kind of work on it and build it up. I see that kind of cycle happening here.
If I can just say that whatever it is, and I'm sure everyone is aware of this, but what used to happen in terms of the mangrove stories, etc., I think that's very, very much a thing of the past for an exceptionally long time to come. So some of these more innovative and more renegade models, rather than looking for money, are probably necessary. There's a good bit though too, is that technology in this space is allowing you more and more and more to leverage what already exists and therefore spend less money. I mean, the best thing that happened to us at Open Amplify was the advent of cloud computing, because for what we wanted to do, had we not been delayed and not really known what to do, we would have been searching for about $40 million to buy servers, and we don't need that now. So what I'd say is look at what's out there that allows you, and that's why I use the example. The reason why, when we were able to go on the cloud, the reason why we got this open API key is we said, look, we've spent a lot of time, money, energy developing this technology. There's about 300,000 really smart developers out there. 4,000 of them are now signed up and playing with this stuff and seeing. People are going to come up with real nuggets of ideas that can use our core technology that it might take us 20 years to get to if we didn't have that. So use what's out there.
I think there are probably like 5 or 6 stages of any early stage company. You have your business plan, and then you have a prototype, and then you have a product with some early adopters, and then a product with revenue and a product with profits. And if those are really the different stages of a company, investors from small to large will choose to invest somewhere along that spectrum, and where they invest will, I think, predominantly depend on the market conditions again, the financial environment. So in times when things are great and there's lots of money to be invested, like June this year is a great example, those investors will go straight back down that channel, and suddenly they're starting to invest in prototypes again, which now or 2 years ago they wouldn't even have thought twice about. At other times when things are difficult in the market, they won't invest in anything that doesn't have revenue. In some cases they're looking for businesses that are profitable, and that could be angels, it could be VCs, it could be private equity. And so I think that there's so much dependent on the market environment. That's really the critical thing. So what does that mean for people who want to be entrepreneurs? Well, it probably means that you should make no assumptions about when you're going to be able to raise money in your business cycle, and you should try and be as lean as possible, and you should build assuming that you're not going to be able to raise money, not because you don't have a great business idea, but because there's just no finance available at that time. And think about what is your plan for adapting to an environment where you can't raise money, so that you can see through that time, because sure enough, the financial investment community will definitely come back full circle. It might not even be that long until they do again. And you're going to be there with a product that kind of works. Maybe it's making some money. So when the checkbook's open, you're ready to take it.
No, it's a really
Great
good piece
point.
of advice. Quite like that. Sorry, the really wanted questions, so please jump. Yes.
I'm trying to decide between this question for director Rob actually. Consultancy versus starting a company. Did you find your few years at Bain, the people you met, the people that really helped with things, or how did that benefit?
Incredibly valuable. There's no way I could have been an entrepreneur when I left university, but that's just me. I just didn't have the skills or the network that we were talking about earlier, Paul, or the grounding knowledge of how business works to be able to be successful. I just couldn't. And so for me, I'm so glad that I went into consulting first, or I had some work experience first. I worked for 6 years before I started thinking about startups. But you have to decide what's right for you. And it is an individual thing. It may be that you have something that you really want to work on that you're passionate about now, and you don't need to go and get that experience in the market or in the world to be able to go off and pursue and fulfill that dream. At the same time, if you're a little unsure, if you do feel like you want to get some experience first, there's no harm in waiting a few years before you do it. You know, in both of our cases, we were both working for 4 or 5 years more longer before we started things in it, and it hasn't hurt us. And I think that I'm a better entrepreneur for sure for having waited a few years before I jumped in.
Yep, gentleman up there.
Yes, related to that question.
Maybe just a bit louder, or if you stand up.
Yeah, related to that question, for your first startup, who were the people you founded the startup with? Some of your friends from university, or people you went into the professional world?
Was that directed at Rob?
Rob.
Yeah.
Oh,
You
okay.
again, I'm afraid.
So the very first one was people I was at university with. Yeah. So I was at Harvard. There was a guy who was my CTO who was at MIT, and I had another co-founder who was at Harvard with me as well. So friends, colleagues from the class.
And what lessons did you learn from your experience with the first?
Never start a business with friends.
Paul, how about yourself in terms of who did you start up with?
So I'm going to put myself as even more of an edge case. I'm a sole founder. Up until the first 18 months is just I was the sole founder. I had contracted in some designers, contracted in some external developers. I've now got a co-founder on board and CTO, but it's taken me 18 months to get there.
But you feel better for it, I trust.
I didn't want to rush into that decision. That was not something that I knew I wanted to press ahead with this idea. And all the stats, all the available data says if you've got more people, a good team around you, your chances of success are much improved. But I didn't want to wait until I got a team in place. I wanted to make some progress straight away, and I was happy to wait 18 months for the right person.
Cool. Down front.
This is a question mainly for the two guys on the left here to do with traction. And so with Gecko board, you're mainly selling to businesses.
Yeah.
So that's one way of looking at it. And with Guilt, you had this referral scheme. And because a lot of startups don't succeed, I was thinking, would Guilt have succeeded without the referral scheme because it's such a good idea, and is the idea big enough? And how did you get traction in terms of, you've listed all those amazing companies that now use your service, but there had to be that big one to set the ball rolling, and how did you get them on board? Was it just hard sales? Or?
I'll go over this one first. So we first started getting traction when we were in beta. So I released the private beta 3 months after we started working on it. So July of last year. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Y Combinator and Hacker News. So I put it up on Hacker News, like the forum for Y Combinator companies, and we had like 850 people kind of sign up that day. And not only was that great in terms of kind of getting the name out there, but the quality of the feedback, I mean, it was fantastic. It was just really, really high quality feedback. And so the thing about Geckoboard in particular is that it's a very visual product and it appeals to people on a visual level. And the great thing about things like Twitter and Facebook is that it's very easy to take a snapshot and share it. So virtually everything that we've had has come through word of mouth. We've done no marketing. We've done no outbound marketing. We had a TechCrunch article when we launched, but apart from that, not a lot of PR and press either. So it's all been pretty much people sharing and letting. I mean, a time will come where we'll have to start marketing it. There's no doubt. But at the moment, we're still kind of focusing on product. But that initial thing was putting it out to, I mean, Hacker News is a great audience for us because there's a bunch of people who wanted to, to see something like this and could see mashups and could see it being useful to them in their jobs as web developers or in ops departments or whatever, it was useful to them. So that's how we got, and there's a lot of influences there as well. So that's how we got started.
I think so your question was about would it have worked without referral. The question is, I don't really. Sorry, the answer is I don't really know the answer because effectively it would have been a lot more expensive. So the great thing about referral is it's a really cheap way of bringing in members. So to be open about it, in the US, through referral it costs us about £1.50 or about $3 per member. $1.50 for each member that we would add through referral. So the way it works, you refer someone who comes in and they buy something and we reward you for that. Now the great thing about that is that person has bought something already. So they're not just a referral, they're a customer. And they are someone who's come in through you, so they've had a warm recommendation rather than just seeing it on a website or on a blog. And so it's a really good quality for us. So a normal member that we would acquire through any other channel or an email address we'd acquire through any other channel will cost us about 4 times that much. So that means to acquire the 5 million or so members that we've acquired so far would have cost us 4 times as much. So I can't tell you that whether or not at some point that might have caused us to stop and say, we're spending too much money here and we're not going to get good value for money on the people we're bringing in. So I'm not sure I have the answer, but it definitely would have grown slower and there would have been a lot more pain points in there if we hadn't have had that great model. To contrast that, look at Spotify. Spotify have built incredibly successful, brilliant business, hardly spend a penny on marketing because they're using word of mouth, their own version of referral, except they're not even rewarding. They have an incredible product that people love, and they're so engaged with it, they want to share it with people, or they want to share it with friends. And so you don't have to have those mechanisms to be really successful.
I have two questions actually about patents. Particularly in computing, I found that some people are like averse that they are against patents, and it sort of seems like in the industry is sort of valuable. So I want to ask you guys, what are your thoughts on patents? If it's worth the energy, the money, and the travel to go to patents applications rather than to focus on the product, or you should do both at the same time. And my second question is if anybody has any experience at Imperial, like applying to a patent to the university itself, and what are the experiences that they can share?
All right, I guess I'll cover. First of all, is the obvious answer, which is it depends on what the product that you're undertaking is. Now, for us, the reason why patents were essential is because we're doing something that everyone's trying to do, but we're doing it in a very different way. And what I'd say is that because there is something quite disruptive about the technology, if you don't patent it, everyone will just reverse engineer it. So it became essential for us to spend the money. What I would say though, as a more general point, is to your question, are patents worth the money? I'd probably say more often than not, they're not, because it is an expensive process. So I think that doing something better and providing a better service is the best way to go, which sounds like I'm contradicting myself, but for us it was essential because we had to have something that differentiated us from the rest of the market, and that's why we have so many patents. I mean, 14 and eventually 21 patents to cover the way in which we do semantic web analysis is, it's a job in itself just maintaining the patents. But that is the wow factor as well, and that's what makes us a little bit different. And it still takes a hell of a long time to get traction. So what I'd say is for a service-based business or for, I doubt that for you guys in what you do, the patent is worth it. But when you're really a pure technology play, if you really, really believe you have something that is, to coin the phrase, game-changing, then it's something essential and you have to build that into your budget. In terms of patents, I don't have direct experience with Imperial, but through my association with Imperial, I understand that it is a very, 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 very solid. I know more from the medical side, by the way, so from the medical school, but it is one of the best, really. So this is as good a place as any to take your patents and navigate your patents through, and you should use that opportunity.
Oh, one more question. Who's going to be lucky last?
Okay, hello. Eventually, because entrepreneurship, as I see it now, and I think most of the people here, it's like there is a certain chance that you succeed, a certain chance that you won't. Eventually, when it comes down, do you think that it comes down to having a killer idea and working on that, or is it having a dedicated, hard-working team working on a rather good idea?
I think execution is king. Execution trumps everything, and
Execute everyone.
that's the mobster way. No. The idea obviously has to be good. It has to have, but there are a million good ideas, and good ideas are. I fundamentally believe good ideas are relatively cheap. If you put your mind on a problem, you can come up with a good idea. Actually getting out there and doing something, taking the first steps, and creating something, learning from that, and building the next step, and that's the idea is just a part of that, and having a team around you that can do it, and having the vision and being able to execute, I think is what makes it different. Now, don't take it from me, I haven't exited anything yet, but to this point, that's I think ideas is secondary.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There's a business in Germany called Rocket, and Rocket Internet. What they do is they build clones. They built 3 or 4 clones. They cloned Groupon, they cloned Airbnb. So they are making a bet that they can out-execute someone who is already pursuing something. They copy exactly the same model, and they try and out-execute. And I couldn't agree more. It's about execution and not about the great idea.
I mean, the Japanese did it first. The Koreans with Samsung then superseded the Japanese in terms of ideas that already existed. Ideas are really, really good, and killer ideas are really, really good. But ultimately, it's what people will use. And having been on both sides of the equation in various things that I've been involved with, to tell you the truth, sometimes the best ideas take the most effort and the most work. And even that, ultimately, whatever we are, unfortunately in business we're in a marketplace, and we've got to give people what they want. I mean, guilt, I didn't know about guilt until today. But I'll tell you one thing, I'm definitely going to go home this evening and get on it.
5 million and one.
Because I look great in Louboutin high heels. But what I'm saying is that it's something that just appeals to every little bit of sentiment, no matter who you are. Just that opportunity of getting a deal. It's a great feeling to get a deal. And that's what you're offering. I mean, I think it's actually dare I say it, it's a better thought out version of Groupon, because it's going forward into this entity and finding things that you actually want. I get that Groupon email every day. I want to hear this. So I think that it is really about executing, and that is where the team element comes in from. The team element comes from the ability to execute, which is beyond the whole thing of, what you said, really, really smart people. Sometimes really, really smart people are really, really crap at getting things done.
And on that note, sorry, I think we do have to cut it short because we've got another lecture in here right now. But let's put our hands together and thank Angad, Paul, and Rob.